Okay, hello guys, and welcome back to Relevant Founders, brought to you by Relevant Software. Relevant is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers world-class standard products for Fortune 500 companies and promising startups. Today on the show, guys, we have our next guest, Dave Jacobs, co-founder and co-CEO at Homethrive. Dave, let's start with you. Give me something for the listeners which not many people know about you.
I've always been kind of entrepreneurial minded, and I've always enjoyed that. And it goes back to when I was even in elementary school. I would ask my mom for extra cookies and cakes, and I would sell them to the kids whose parents wouldn't give them those things. And then I had lemonade stands and things of that nature. And in college, had a number of different businesses. But I've always enjoyed the challenge of starting something and building something and having to be scrappy and kind of entrepreneurial kind of in the process.
Wow. And why do you think that is? Why did you think you kind of had that mindset at school? Were your parents like that? Or?
My dad was like that. He was an attorney, but he had a lot of other side businesses that he developed. And I've just liked the accountability that comes with it, the creativity, and frankly, the freedom that you get outside of kind of a bigger corporate structure.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, cool. Right. Let's get into the world of Homethrive. Tell me, what is Homethrive?
We are a family caregiver platform. I'll just back up for the listeners. As people kind of age and they want to be at home, it creates a lot of challenges for family members who want to support them and be there for them. And it creates a lot of work and worry and stress, as well as for family members who have special needs. And what we do is we really focus on supporting family members who are trying to be there for their aging parents and family members with special needs with navigation, coordination, services, and products to help reduce that work, worry, and stress for family members who have families of their own, have a career in many cases, and also are trying to be there for their parents. So we combine kind of a high service model with technology to really give people the support they need at the right level whenever they need it.
Nice. Okay, we're going to go into that in a minute. We're going to find out a little bit more about the tech and how you can kind of mix the two together. Why did you go about building Homethrive?
I spent 15 years working at a large medical products company in the US called Medline. I ran the post-acute business. So it's relevant because I was one of the more knowledgeable people probably in the country on nursing homes, home health, hospice, a lot of retail products, durable medical equipment and whatnot. And nevertheless, when my father got very sick very quickly and wanted to be at home with my mom in Connecticut, and I was in Chicago, my brother's in Chicago, we found it incredibly difficult. I found it incredibly difficult to be there for my parents, to be there for my wife and my nuclear family, and to be there for my career. And it was frankly overwhelming. I was in 3 weeks, I gained about 15 pounds. I wasn't taking certain medication I should be taking. I thought about taking a leave of absence. And it occurred to me that if I'm struggling with this, given the experience I have, frankly, we have a close family and we had the means to support my parents, I wondered, what does everybody else do? And you come to find out a lot of people are going through this. And that kind of set me on a journey to talk to others, including my co-founder, David Greenberg, that really inspired us to leave our cushy jobs at Medline to start a business to really be there and provide the support we felt family caregivers need in order to be able to kind of manage and juggle all these different dynamics and kind of responsibilities in their life.
Okay, tell me, what was the reason as why, obviously you were saying that you found kind of a gap in the market where you took that kind of a gap and you basically filled it to build your company. What was your kind of hesitations before you did it? So you were 15 years at Medline before this. What were your hesitations doing it? Because that's a big jump from 15 years of safety in a big role to go into a startup. Tell me.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a real challenge. I'd started one business before and I knew the challenges of starting something from scratch. I had almost a pit in my stomach because I know the challenges of trying to build momentum when you don't have any to start with. And in our case, we knew we'd be creating a market that didn't exist. And so it wasn't like we were trying to replace somebody else or do something better. We're trying to kind of create awareness for a need that kind of goes somewhat undetected in many cases. So there's a challenge in that. And I went from a role at Medline where we had a lot of momentum. It's a great company. I had a role where I had a lot of people working for me and doing a lot of things for me. And we also were in a category that was very well known and well established and had a lot of organic growth. And I was getting paid very well, to be honest. So all those things were challenges to kind of break out. But the moment what kind of set me on this path too, I was taking a walk with my wife and we were talking about this and she asked me an interesting question. She said, I was turning 50. She said, let's fast forward. You're 60 years old. You stay at Medline. You're done well. How do you feel? And I said, I would feel like I took the easy way out. because I had figured out the job. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't as challenging as I wanted. And I said, I would feel like I took the easy way out, and that wouldn't feel very good. And even though we'd be very comfortable financially, and I would have been able to celebrate a really nice career there, I didn't feel like that would be rewarding. And so that really was the moment that this made me decide to kind of look for something else, and then to do it with my partner, David. But it's a challenge. And also what's interesting is, you ask yourself hard questions, but also my family members ask hard questions. My daughter, who's 18 now, she asked some of the hardest questions. She said to me, well, Dad, what happens if it doesn't work? Which is a very fair question. I had to think through that, and I said, I'll get another job. And then her litmus test, she's a big fan of Lululemon clothing. Oh. And she said, well, can I still go to Lululemon? And I said, yes. And she said, okay, good luck. So she felt like her standard of living would be maintained, at least kind of with that.
Very, very nice. Tell me that, obviously you're talking about your co-founder. How did you go about finding your co-founder to build Homethrive?
David and I have been very close friends, best friends for a long time. We worked together, but not the same part of Medline. And we had kind of a similar experience, both personally and kind of a similar passion that developed, and a similar desire to do something that was meaningful and really would make an impact beyond selling more medical supplies to nursing homes and hospitals. So we had kind of a common mission and a common approach. We have a tremendous amount of kind of affection for each other, but also trust in our judgment and the way we kind of work together. And we knew our values are very similar. And so we built a company together that was kind of with the same kind of mission and values. We thought that would be very effective. And then we did have to work to figure out what would be the difference in roles, because unlike some co-founders where one is highly technical and one is more commercial, we were probably more similar in that regard. But we were able to kind of tease those out. And as the business has grown, we've been able to we collaborate in the right ways, but we also have kind of lanes within the company where we specialize and focus.
Nice. Tell me more about that, because obviously that's really important. When two co-founders are very, very similar, they actually sometimes need to be opposites, for one person to slow them down, one person to speed them up, the risk taker, the guy who's more about the numbers. Yep. How did you kind of work that out? What did you do? I guess you hired your C-level, your other C guys. How did you approach that, and what was your criteria?
Well, what's interesting about our skills, so while we have some similar skills, we also do have different perspectives. I'm probably more of a focused person and kind of focus and go fast. David sees probably more opportunities, and at times I would characterize it as picking up every shiny penny, but it's also seeing some opportunities and being more open. So that debate and discussion and balance is actually very helpful. I'm probably a little more of a risk taker than he is. So at times I'm maybe at times hyper aggressive, and he'll kind of bring a little bit of perspective and caution, and appropriately so, to kind of our decisions. So that's helpful kind of in that process. And then we will, from a functional standpoint, he really is more involved with kind of finance, a lot of the administration, HR, which is an important part of what we do, and works with our board a little bit more than I do. I spend more time on sales, marketing, product, and technology in our kind of business.
Okay, so yeah, definitely. So you have those kind of similarities, but definitely the things that obviously help when being both so different as well. Let's go right back to the beginning. Tell me about your original MVP.
Our original MVP was purely service oriented, and we hired our head of care management. She was the third employee we hired. And she built a team of like-minded social workers. And our MVP was a high service model where we would go to a company and we would offer to help kind of assign we call them care guides, our social worker to a family in need who's going through a family caregiving struggle. And they would work with that family over time and help them navigate and work through those processes over time. So the benefit was it gave us flexibility, because it's purely service oriented, we could modify things quickly, but we also recognized it had an inherent scalability challenge and cost challenge over time that we'd have to solve.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, as you started to grow, as you started to grow Homethrive, so it's only been going since now, I think October 2018, if I remember.
Yes.
What have been the challenges on the way? So first of all, first question would be, what number of staff are you sitting at roughly at the moment?
So right now we have about 70 colleagues.
Wow.
Within Homethrive.
Okay, nice. So what was the challenges building up to the 70 colleagues that you've got now?
So from a people standpoint, it's a matter of it's finding the right fit, both culturally and technically, if you will, because as you know well, and I'm sure your listeners know, an early stage business is very different than a more established, larger company. The kind of rhythms are different. The flexibility you need is different. And importantly, you need to be very comfortable and actually embrace ambiguity, because people who like a lot of data to make decisions and want to feel highly confident in any decision are very uncomfortable in a startup. And you have to be, comfortable with changes in direction. People talk about pivots and some are bigger than others, but that change in direction isn't schizophrenia and it's not that ineptitude. It's really just the nature of the business and being responsive to kind of market needs and what you see. And that is not a specific technical skill, but that's a mindset. And so we've had to find people who really enjoy that and embrace it. We've had a few people who found it uncomfortable and they weren't the right fit. So we typically look for people with earlier stage experience, because while people say they know it and they understand it, we want people who've actually been through it and they know what that means. And we don't have to do as much education of them, and they know what's good for them and what they want. And because people think they might know that they would like it, but they actually don't. So it's finding a combination of those things.
Do you think you have to be a specific type of person then to work for a startup, and even more specifically to build a startup?
I think there's certainly common characteristics. I think you have to enjoy the challenge of building. You have to be willing to, it's probably less of an ego dynamic, because people, unlike Medline, where everybody knew Medline. And while we didn't earn all the business, we were considered for almost every piece of business. Mm-hmm. Here, nobody knows in the beginning, especially, nobody knew our company name. And nobody fully understood in the beginning this category because it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. It was, there's two other small companies that we compete with. So it's not like everybody's looking for a solution and they're deciding with whom to go. We're educating them about the need and the problem and making them more aware, and then why we're the best solution. So somebody's got to be willing to do that. And you know a lot more, you get more frustration kind of in the process, and everything takes longer and more energy than you probably think, which is part of the excitement. But you have to be willing to put that in and really, I think, get a lot of energy out of the wins you get, because unlike at Medline, where I feel like I made a contribution, I ran a $4 billion business. There were a lot of really talented people. It would be hard to say exactly what I contributed versus others. Here, every individual, I think, feels a much greater sense of direct contribution to kind of our success and the progress. And you have to really enjoy that in order to kind of be willing to put in all the work that goes to create that.
It's so important, isn't it? And as you said, it's kind of like the ego. You have to drop your ego to be able to do it, because you're yes. going to lose that. I'm no longer running a £4 billion business, but I am going to be helping people directly. Yep. Tell me, with regards to obviously being at Medline for 15 years and then building your startup, always being very entrepreneurial mindseted. What did you not have enough of? What skills did you lack to become a CEO of a startup?
It's a great question. And I would say, well, there's a couple of areas that we've been trying to bolster. One is from a technology standpoint. Well, I'm comfortable with technology, but neither David nor I are technologists in any way and have a deep understanding of that. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is, it took us a little time to recognize, what does a talented technology person for a startup look like? And what are the skills we need? When it comes to our chief revenue officer or chief marketing, I have a much better intuitive understanding of what good looks like for a startup. That's been a little more of a challenge for us on the technology side, to kind of understand and know what we're looking for. And I would say technology and data, because those are areas we understand at a high level, but not quite at a more granular level that you need for a startup. So that's been a learning curve for us as well over the last 3.5 years.
How did you learn it? Because that'd be really interesting for our listeners going through the same thing, maybe not perhaps coming from a technology background. How do you learn how to hire the great CTO, how to create your technology kind of side of the business?
So it's interesting, because there's a couple of different dynamics. One is to figure out, how can we use technology to kind of get scale and impact on the business, but also maintain the effectiveness of it. So that's been a part. And the other part is building the team and what are the characteristics? What does good look like? So that's where I think having a really effective board comes in. And it's not, there's a temptation just to get people who give you money. And that's certainly important, but we've been very fortunate to have wonderful partners in Seven Wire Ventures and Lee Shapiro and Glenn Tolman and Robert Garber in particular. And so they have been strong financial supporters, but they've also given us a lot of great advice. They get involved in the hiring process for some of these key roles and give us input. They're never telling us what to do, but they've got a valuable perspective that's been helpful, including bringing in other people. So Glenn introduced us to the former chief technology officer of Livongo, who had come from Evernote, and we involved him in our hiring process. And so he could evaluate some technical kind of elements, but also some of the characteristics about building a team and building a remote team that we wouldn't have as close a sense of, and we came to trust him. We also have an investor who's a former technology kind of leader at another company, and we've involved him in the process. I ask a lot of questions of a lot of people to get a perspective, and I've learned to ask better questions over time and understand, what are the things you look for, especially people like me who don't necessarily have the deep experience in technology, to be able to understand what is it you're looking for. And you come to find out a lot of it is there's a technical element to some degree, but it's more general business vision, leadership things that are important in that area, like they are in other parts of business.
Yeah, exactly. You were talking there about obviously thinking about technology in order to start scaling the business. At what time, at what period of since the beginning of your startup did you think, oh, okay, we can't do this manually anymore. We need to get technology involved.
We knew that from the beginning, but I would be lying if I told you we had it all figured out. It took us a while to figure out how do we take this really effective high service and translate it into a technology solution that would be either equally or largely effective and complement the service component. And it took us a couple of years to kind of come to that, understand that. We kind of dabbled with some other ideas and technologies, including interactive tablet for older adults that was well done, but it wasn't highly effective to meet our needs. And then really about 15 or 16 months ago, things really coalesced through some conversations to really kind of help us develop a view of what the technology could do to complement the service. And it's somewhat of a contrarian view to the way other people do it, but we found it to be very effective. And we've been able to kind of iterate on it quite a bit. And we're excited about that direction. But I would say it's a function. We kept asking ourselves the question. And so it was always front of mind. And so I think you look through a different lens when you're always having this question, could this work? What are the other analogies that we could see in other industries or segments of, healthcare or non-healthcare that would inform kind of the way we're doing things. So, but it took a while. It's not easy. It's easy to say, but it's hard to be able to do that effectively.
But I guess that also helps, as you said, with the different kind of lens. It gives you an opportunity to be able to analyze everything for such a long time to see how it could best work. Okay, tell me about the hardest part, a little bit about challenges for yourself now, okay? So about the hardest part of your challenge to date. What's been the hardest part of building Homethrive?
That's a great question. I think the hardest part for me and probably David and I and the leadership team is as we struggle with priorities, which is not unique to us as a company, but we have more opportunities than we have resources. And we struggle to kind of make sure we're prioritizing the right things and being able to learn quickly and be able to figure out, is it worth kind of proceeding to the next level, or should we kind of pivot off those and focus elsewhere? And what the right number of things to focus on is probably the biggest struggle that we continue to have. And I would say several times a week, I spend time stepping back to kind of review our company's priorities, my priorities, and making sure they continue to make sense. When I was at Medline, I was focused on priorities, but they were more annual and sometimes multi-year priorities because that was the nature of the organization and the size and whatnot. Here, kind of thinking about them in a much shorter period as we learn, incorporating that learning and then kind of reprioritizing even customer-specific opportunities as well.
But how do you actually streamline that? So you were saying you take that step back and you're able to look at it and see what is the most important. How is there kind of like something that you've learned recently which really helps you to streamline the process?
So I would say there's a couple. We've kind of implemented about 6 months ago an OKR process that has been helpful, and that has a forcing function. One of you've got to identify a limited number of priorities, and so I usually start that process and then get our input from our leadership team, and we'll have a debate on some of those things, which is really healthy. And then we focus on, and then of course there's what are the specific projects around the 3 to 4 kind of big objectives, and that creates more debate and discussion. And we usually stick to those pretty closely. But I spend time, especially with sales and marketing, trying to be a part of some of those processes so that I can hear firsthand from customers and see what we're doing to figure out, is there some insight that would cause us to adjust to different things. And I spend a lot of time learning and trying to focus on things and asking, it gets back to the ego. You have to kind of be willing to ask what may feel like stupid questions or very basic questions, and expose that you haven't figured it all out. And usually that leads, if you listen carefully enough and talk to the right people, you can get some nuggets of good ideas, or you start to see a pattern of things that emerge. And that input for me is very helpful to kind of adjust those priorities and different ideas to the business.
I guess it comes back to that point again where you said about pivots as well. So pivots are part of the nature. And if you're listening to these customer interviews and the customers and they're saying, actually, no, we want it this way, then you have to pivot sometimes. You need to make that pivot.
The phrase we use, I think I heard it from Mark Andreessen, not directly, but I've read it, which I think is, strong opinions loosely held. And so it gives also permission to say, it doesn't mean you're wrong. You've just learned something new that has caused us to kind of be willing to open. But for some period of time, we've got to commit and kind of march forward.
Okay, we spoke about the hardest kind of moments since moving into Homethrive. What has been the easiest that was actually quite shocking for you?
I'm not sure if I would characterize as the easiest, but people ask me, how does it feel? You were at Medline a long time, how do you contrast? And my answer which I believe is I thoroughly enjoyed my 15 years there. I learned a tremendous amount of things. I have not had one day I wish I was back. And that's not because I think Medline's a fantastic place. I've recommended people there. I still keep in touch with folks, but it's challenging. I enjoy the challenge that I get every single day to think about things differently, to think about our sales process differently, the kind of people we're hiring. Do we have the right people in the right spots? How do we prioritize? And so that's not easy, but it's an invigorating challenge that I enjoy thoroughly. And I like being consumed by it. It doesn't just feel like work. It's really interesting. And it has pushed me to learn and develop my own skills in a way that I wasn't required to do in the past.
How do you cope with that pressure? Obviously, it's your business, it's your baby. How do you cope with that pressure? Weekends, holidays, how do you cope?
I think over the years, it's one of the benefits of having some experience. I've kind of learned over time to kind of manage that in general so that I can still be a very present spouse and parent and all those other kinds of things. I will tell you, I read a lot and listen a lot to a lot of things related to Stoic philosophy. And because one of the core principles is something that I think about quite a bit. I have it on my wall is, basically to focus on the things that I can control and worry a lot less about what I can't control. And as simple as that is, it's not novel. It is a very empowering thing. And because I can't control how many new customers we get necessarily. I have control over the people and the training that we have, some of the tools that they have, the ways we focus, and the activity levels and my own activity levels. But I can't control the output. And I'm very kind of outcome and results oriented, but I've also learned that you can't control those things. And I've learned that a long time. Before we went on air, we were talking about some of my morning routine, and swimming is part of that. And swimming does teach you, you have a time in mind, and I still compete, but it's really the process. What I can control is, how well I show up, how often I show up, how hard I work. And I have to trust that the output will be there. And if it's not, in this case, I tweak things with my coach and in my routine to try to get a better output. But all I can control is how I show up, my attitude, my energy, how I show up that morning.
I mean, it's so true, isn't it? I mean, you get really what you put in, and if it doesn't work, you change it. If you don't change it, then you're the fool, really.
Right.
Okay, wow. Two more questions. So tell me, what would you like people to remember about Homethrive after this, after our conversation? What would you want them to remember?
I'm going to take it in two directions. One, on Homethrive, I guess I would like them, maybe it's somewhat of a shameless plug, but for the category that the need for support for family caregivers is growing tremendously. It's somewhat under-recognized because family caregivers kind of suffer in silence. They don't talk about it the way they do when they have children and things, but it's a critical component to retention and productivity and diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health. And we really believe that in 5 years with insurance companies and kind of corporations, family caregiver support is going to have the level of participation and prevalence that you see with mental health now compared to 5 years ago. And I think we're very passionate about, if somebody doesn't use Homethrive, they should, as a company, and offer this to their employees, they should offer something because it's really critical. On the more broad entrepreneurial front, I think as people think about it, it takes a tremendous commitment and a tremendous level of energy, but it's incredibly rewarding. And it just also requires a level of patience and perseverance that is different than other kind of organizations. And you don't get the kind of immediate, frequent rewards that you might get in a company. And because progress is measured over a different period of time, but it can be incredibly rewarding for somebody and will be an environment, if somebody's thinking about doing it or in the midst of it, that will challenge you and kind of give you an opportunity to grow that like very few other kind of opportunities. And it's exciting. And the last thing is my daughter, I say, well, what happens if it doesn't work? There's always other opportunities. And so to be afraid and not try it only because of that, I would encourage people to kind of rethink that and kind of embrace an opportunity, recognizing that the skills they have and the skills they'll gain will make them eminently employable somewhere else, or another startup if that's what they wanted to do in the future.
You've actually kind of answered my next question here, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. In regards to other founders here listening to you and thinking about how they can build their company to be a success as well, what would that be? What would be that one thing which you know now, which you didn't know when you started out, which has helped you the most?
It's a great question. I'm trying. I think that, I guess I've answered it two ways. One is, as a founder, you have to believe in what you're doing so much that you really are an evangelist in many different respects. You have to be an evangelist to prospective customers, because in many cases you're trying to get them to do something that's fundamentally different than what they've done before, and in there they might perceive it to be risky and it's out of the norm, and most people aren't kind of early adopters. So you have to be an evangelist, and there's a passion that you have to do that. But you also have to have that same passion with people you are trying to recruit to be colleagues of yours. And so people are looking, do you believe? Because there's no success at Medline. You say you can join. We're the biggest in the industry. We've had double-digit growth. Kind of, it's very easy to kind of lay that out. Here, in the beginning, we can't provide people that sort of evidence, but it's that belief that we're going to be successful, and we have a vision that's really exciting and empowering, and not forgetting the people who've already joined you. And in this mission is to continue to evangelize kind of what we're doing, and preparing people for the fact that it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be, kind of episodic and ups and downs. Absolutely. And it's okay. And we still believe, and to have a level of energy that is inspiring and kind of, I guess, is somewhat contagious to other people. And that takes, I don't feel that every day when I wake up, but I try to do whatever I can to get myself in the mindset so that when I show up to my colleagues and prospective customers, I bring that energy, which I fundamentally believe, but I need to convey that and often. And you have to, as a founder, have that sort of, or have somebody who's got that sort of energy and belief when there's not evidence necessarily for all that belief.
That must be very tiring. I mean, very, very tiring at times as well, and difficult, but it comes with its rewards, 100%. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. We've managed to get through our questions very, very quickly. And your company and what you're doing is quite admirable. And this is why I believe it's so important, what you're doing, and so amazing why technology can make life so much easier now. So thank you for joining. And
thank you, Matt. This is great. And it's wonderful that you're sharing these things, because being a founder is, you don't know what the context is always, and you don't know kind of what does good normal look like and what does good look like. And having people to talk to about that, I will say, there's colleagues that we have who are going through this. I'll ask them, like, here's what we're going through. Is this normal? And usually they'll say yes. Once in a while they'll say no. And here's, how did you deal with this? It's really helpful. Because it can feel very lonely, even with a great kind of friend and co-founder like I have, but we only know what we know, and having other people around to provide context can be really helpful.
Hey guys, it's me again. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, be sure to press the thumbs up button below. And also, whilst you're there, hit subscribe. Otherwise, you could miss out on all of our interesting content we've got coming your way in the near future. Okay, guys, take care and see you soon.